Hello folks, Chad Stanton here, and it's Wednesday, which is another episode of After Hours Woodworking. So on this show, I give you what I've been doing in the shop. I answer some viewer emails, and I do a little product review, or product suggestion, if you will. Okay, so this week I've been mostly working out there on my shop. As you recall, last week I put in 3 windows, and the windows are in and makes a great change in there. It just lets in so much more light. I get a nice cross breeze going, and I get to look at the beautiful woods right out back from my shop. But I've decided I want a 4th window now. I want a small one because in the one corner it's going to be my designated spray booth area. And I just want a small window for that, throw a fan in it, help get some of that out. So that's kind of a drag because I feel like I'm going backwards now. I had the windows done, and now I feel like I got to bring all that gear back out. But anyhow, that happens as you make it up as you go along. I also, too, started the insulation and I guess they call it the banding. So unlike a regular residential house where I'm putting studs every 16 inches, these are just horizontal pieces of wood, 2x4s in this case. And I've decided I'm not going to drywall it. I'm actually going to put plywood on. So that way I can pretty much screw things wherever I want. So I'm just putting these bands every 4 feet to where I can screw the plywood onto it. But I put one band in right at the 7-foot mark because if I want to hang cabinets, I'll not only have the plywood that I'm going to be anchoring to, but also that 2x4 stud behind it so they don't pull off. But I got about a third of that done, and one of the stupid things I did on it, cockiness. Here we go, we're getting cocky. I've mentioned before that my hands are really dry, and I don't really get slivers all that often, and when I work with the fiberglass insulation, well, the fiberglass doesn't bother my hands. It's like it doesn't get in under the pores of the skin. Well, that's fine for my hands. What I forgot, though, was right here on my arms, where the skin is really soft and tender, and that fiberglass would get on there, and I was itching like crazy. And of course it was hot, so I didn't want to wear a long sleeve shirt. So the second day I remembered a tip that actually a heating and air guy told me many moons ago. Was he said take baby powder and put the baby powder on your arm or your hands, and he said his hands in this case, but I put it on my arms, and the baby powder like fills in your pores, and it helps prevent that fiberglass insulation getting in there. And so that's what I did the second day, and it was a lot better. So there's a tip for you. And so I'm just going to keep continuing with that. Hopefully I get the insulation done this week on it. Some other good news. I'm really excited about this. I've been talking with Arbortech. Now, Arbortech does different grinding and sculpting tools. They're a company out of Australia, which I know we have several viewers of the show there in Australia. In fact, my sister's in Australia, and the company is like 5 minutes from her house. No kidding. Didn't plan that, and just happened out that way. And what I'm pretty excited about is, growing up as a kid, my exposure to the world was through TV. And typically, TV just showed what was happening in America. But now, with the internet, we have unlimited access to anywhere in the world. So it's neat for me to be pairing up with Arbortech. So what we're going to be doing is, they're not sponsoring the show, but I will be doing 3 featured videos for them. So there'll be 3 individual projects spotlighting one of their tools, and I had the pleasure of experimenting with one of the tools, the turbo grinder, at the Woodcraft Vendor Trade Show, and I was really impressed because unlike other grinders where you're making sawdust, this was making chunks, wood shavings, and so I like that a whole lot better. At any rate, 3 unique projects. They're going to be kind of cool. I'm not going to tell you what they are yet, but as it gets closer, I'll give you all the inside scoop before the rest of the world. But unfortunately, you're not going to be seeing these videos anytime soon. They're going to be releasing them next year at specific times because they have some things lined up. So you'll have to wait to see it. But of course, I'll keep you filled in on with it. But I'm real happy to be doing something with Arbortech, and I hope it leads to a longer relationship together with us. So that was exciting for me. Okay, so Les was feeling pretty good this week. So Dennis and myself were over there, and Scott Midgley joined us as well. And so, as you know, we're trying to complete some furniture pieces for Les. His strength isn't what it used to be, and woodworking is in his blood, like the rest of us. If you cut us, we bleed sawdust. And so, for Les to have us there, encouraging and helping him get the stuff done, and we did great. I mean, the 4 of us this week, we really cranked out a lot. There's a lot of drawers on that high boy. And last week we got the pins cut for the drawer fronts. This week we were doing the tails. And I always tell it to you guys, and I'm following my own advice here, getting out of comfort zones. And I was out of my comfort zone for a couple of things in there. One, it's not my shop. And so knowing where the placement of tools are and using just how a tool feels in your hand that's not yours was a little awkward for me. The second thing was so Dennis and I are mostly hand tool guys. Les is a power tool guy. And Dennis and I were cutting the dovetails out, and Les had a couple of cool tools for us to use. It was still done by hand, but he had, I think it was the Lee Valley Veritas like dovetail angle gauge thing. It clamps on the board. I got some photos here you're probably seeing. Clamps on the board, and it has the angle already preset to it. I think this one was 1:6 on it. And what's neat, not only does it guide your saw, but it's got a magnet in it, so it holds your saw right to it, and it's pretty much goof-proof. So you can say you cut them by hand. Technically, you cut them by hand, but this was just a really, really precise thing. And I was using a Japanese pole saw, which I usually use the Western back saw, push saw. So it was different for me. Dennis and I were kind of laughing. It kind of feels a little bit like cheating, but let me tell you, when you are cutting that many drawers, it definitely speeds the process up quite a bit. So, and I used a coping saw too to cut out the waste, which I never use a coping saw, and I used the really nice one. I forget the name brand on it. I'll probably have the name brand here for you all. Very nice saw, but I'm still not comfortable with them. I still had my usual issues of not being able to cut exactly to the line, so I had to cut a little proud and then clean it up with some chisel work afterward. Anyhow, so that's what we did, and Les was really happy with all the progress we had this week. So hopefully we keep it going for next week. All right, so let's get into some viewer email questions. This is kind of a follow-up to the one from last week. So Abraham Hashimi was gluing up his tabletop, and I mentioned about using pipe clamps for doing that, and my tip was to put some tape on for where the glue squeeze-out was. And he asked if there was any difference between using like the pipe clamps versus like parallel clamps, or I forget what they call these, F clamps, K clamps, whatever, something like this. And I said, no, there's no difference. They'll do a nice job. This actually has more surface for if you have something that's thicker. It has more clamping surface to it. But what I like about pipe clamps is, let's say you have a really long piece, longer than what this clamp can reach. I can just go get a black pipe coupler and screw that on, and then add another pipe on this and go as long as I want. So pipe clamps, for me, are pretty versatile. But that comes to a couple other points I wanted to talk about when you're clamping up your work. If you've got some wide boards, and again, I suggest gluing them one by one, but some people will do 3 or 4. When you're clamping it up, you have to be careful, because when you do put this pressure, what can happen, it can, as you're squeezing, you can bow your work. You can get overzealous with this and crank down on it, and instead of it staying flat like it does, it'll actually bow, and it's sometimes very subtle, but you notice as soon as you take it out of the clamps, and then it's too late. So a couple of tips for that. One is alternate the direction of your clamps. So if this clamp is on the bottom, then the next clamp should be on the top, and keep staggering them like that, and evenly tighten them up as you go. That will help keep the boards flat as they're drying. The other thing you can do is some cawls. Let me get these. So the cawls are essentially just 2 pieces of wood, but I don't know if you can see it from there, but you notice I got this gap up here, but they're touching in the middle. And they're purposely planed that way. I cut them on the table saw, some square stock, and then plane the edges. So what this does is, now with that in there, I'll put the work surface in the middle, and then you clamp the ends, and it's putting all the pressure in the middle, and you keep clamping until it's making contact. These will clamp down flat. And it really does a nice job of keeping the boards perfectly flat, because it's putting more pressure in the middle and then on the end. So that's another suggestion. Okay, let me get some of this out of the way. What else did I have? Oh, and then Andrew Inkham, if I got your name wrong, Andrew, I'm sorry. He also had questions on clamping up really long pieces. So if the black pipe doesn't work for you, if that trick doesn't work, there's another trick you can do. It's really, I've seen it done over in the Far East, in the Asian countries. Where is I'm going to use this for an example. Now, this is obviously not a long piece, but you'll get the idea. What they would do is, they would take rope and wrap it around here. So you can do this for really long pieces. Just get some long rope, you wrap it around there, tie it as tight as you can, all right? And then you take several wedges, and I mean several, probably like, I don't know, as many as you want, 10, 12, and you tap the wedges in under the rope. And so it's stretching from all directions. It's stretching that rope, and it's squeezing in on it, and they make great clamps, and they produce some fantastic workmanship, and you won't see one single clamp in their shop. It's just they got rope everywhere. So that's another means of clamping. All right, so okay, so Marcel Digel. Again, sorry about butchering your name there, Marcel. Marcel had some questions about routing. He said whenever he routes, uses his router, he gets a lot of loose fibers from the wood after he was routing, and he wondered, was it a dull bit? Was he doing something wrong? So without actually seeing the piece, I couldn't tell exactly, because it was just a question, right? I didn't see a photo. So here's a couple of things. How you're routing is important. So just like when you plane with a board, you want to be going with the grain, right? Because you get a nice shaving. If you're planing going against the grain, you're going to get tear out. Well, the router bit essentially is doing the same thing. It's spinning, but if you're going into the grain, you're going against it, you can get some tear out, some splintering, loose fibers, all right? Now, you try to go with the grain, but it's not going to matter, especially if like you're going to go all the way around on the workpiece. At some point, you're going to be going with it, and then you're going to be going against it, so we can't help that. So a couple of tips. One, always do your end grain first. The reason being is as that router goes across, it's going to break out and splinter the edge grain here. That's okay, because if you do that first and it breaks out, well then when you go with the edge grain, it's gonna remove all of that. So always do end grain first. The other thing too is maybe don't try and make the whole depth in one passing. Do it 2, maybe 3 times. Sneak up on it. Okay, that will help eliminate some of the blowout or the fibers that you get. Another thing that happens pretty common with using the router is you'll get burn marks on it, and that has to do with either the dull bit or your rate of feeding it, how fast you're going with it. If you're going too slow, the blade can burn. So a couple of tricks that I've used in the past is I will spray the wood with denatured alcohol. And what that does is it will cause the wood fibers to swell, to raise the grain, and then you can go back over it and it will help clean some of that burn off. Another trick that you can do, and I hesitate telling people, especially if you're a beginner with a router, is what they call a climb cut. So when you are putting your router into the wood, the router should be cutting into it. Basically, the router bit is spinning, going kind of like the opposite direction of what you're pushing. You don't want to be pushing it the same direction because the router will run away on you. And it can either, like I said, pull you, or it can quickly jab and kick out of the wood. It's just dangerous to do a climb cut. So, how do you remember what direction it goes? This is how I like to think of it. I like to think of a clock. So anything on the inside of the framework of the clock. So if I have a box, I'm going to go clockwise, just like the hands of the clock. All right, so I got my box, I take my router, and I'm going to go clockwise. If I'm going to be working on the outside of the box, well then it's the opposite of what the hands are. You're going to go counterclockwise. So inside, clockwise, outside, counterclockwise. That's a good way to remember it. Keeps you safe. Keep in mind, though, if you've got a router table, that's going to change because the router's in a different position. But most of you, if you're beginners, you probably have a small handheld router, and those are great tips for it. I'll just say it one more time. The inside of the box, going clockwise. Outside of the box, counterclockwise. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? Was that? Yeah, that's it. And by the way, if you do a climb cut, that also helps eliminate that burn that you can get with the router. So I hope that helps you some, Marcel. If not, feel free to email me again, send me some photos, and we'll see what we can't do to get your problem solved. Okay, this last one, these were not so much questions, but they were true emails coming from viewers, and it's kind of a little scary that I had 3 of this situation happen this week, and that is power tool safety. Terry Krelling had an accident with his table saw. He's okay, but he did cut his thumb. Tom Tittlemeyer, he too had problems with his table saw, cut his finger. Looked pretty bad, but sometimes looks can be deceiving, but Tom's going to be all right as well. And Les actually had a problem with his router. He was cutting his pins, and when he was done with he cut his pins, and then he would take the router and he was turning it over to set it down on the table, and he got too close to himself, and it grabbed his vest and his shirt, and tore it up pretty good. Didn't cut him at all, but it definitely kind of shook him up. Shook me up. I was standing right there watching him. It shook me up. So, look, folks, I know a lot of these tools are incredibly efficient. They're safe. They're safer, than the older stuff, like 60s and 70s. But I know myself included, you have to be really, really comfortable. The table saw that I have, I like it. It's smooth. It's quieter than my one I use out in the field. And because it's smoother and quieter, it lulls me into a false sense of security. And you can never let your guard down when it comes to power tools. I had a small incident about a month ago. I was using my table saw out in the field, and fortunately I had a dull blade in it. And I made the cut. I turned the saw off, and I'm trying to think, and I'm trying to rush, and I pulled something else up, and I was going to use the top of my table saw as a little workbench, and the blade hadn't come to a final stop, and my hand just hit the side of the blade, and again the teeth were dull, but it shaved some of my fingernail off, and I pulled my hand out right away, clutching it, thinking it's gonna be squirting blood everywhere. I kind of did the look, and I was like, wow, I was all right. I was really scared over that because I've never had an accident with a power tool, and it's a wake-up call for all of us. All of us, don't get too comfortable. If you're tired, take a break. Don't rush through it. Don't push through it just to get it done. Please, please, let's be safe. I want us all right back here each week. Okay, so enough on the safety. I'll stop beating it over your head. Let's see, what else we got going? Oh, okay. So let me talk to you about should you own it? Now, usually in this segment, I have a tool suggestion for you, but an email that came in earlier this week got me thinking. They don't have to be tool suggestions. They could just be a product suggestion. And so this product suggestion this week happens to be some material, and I'm sure all of us have used or know of at one point in our time, is MDF, medium density fiberboard. Now, I mentioned in my early beginnings of woodworking, especially doing projects for clients, they wanted things cheaper, and the only way I said I would do it cheaper is if I used a cheaper material, and they didn't care. It's like, whatever it takes. And so I built stuff out of MDF, and I had two problems that came along with this. One, I hated working with it. It's very heavy. It makes very fine dust, so you have to wear a mask with it. And I hate wearing a mask, but you have to wear a mask. The chemicals in it are dangerous. I mean, I think MDF has like formaldehyde in it or something that's really bad for you. So, you're breathing that in. It's not good for your health. It just makes an absolute dust storm in your shop. And then besides being heavy, it has terrible, terrible holding properties to it. Like if you're doing some gluing, it doesn't take the edge grain, or the end grain doesn't take glue well at all. If you're trying to use pocket screws or any screws, the screws will pull out. It doesn't have anything really good to bite and hold into. It's just a terrible product. But people will do it for two reasons. One, because it's cheap, and 2, it takes a great paint surface. You really just want a nice smooth paint surface. MDF is great for that. So I quickly had some issues with some clients in the beginning. I made things in their price point and used MDF, and they were totally okay with using a cheaper product until there was issues with the failing, either breaking or sagging or whatever the deal was. And they don't remember the fact that they chose that product. All they remember is I built it. So my reputation was on the line, and I fixed it, used quality stuff. I ate, the mistakes. But ever since then, I never, ever lowered my price on material. And so the way I say that to the client is, it costs just as much for me to cut a nice board as it does a cheap board. Same cost, same usage on my saw. So why not go with the nicer boards? And they usually get it. And if they don't, then I don't want them for a customer. My suggestion, though, is let's say you really want that paint surface smooth that you get from MDF. What can you use? Well, there is another product, and I believe it's called MDO, medium density overlay. So it's like plywood. It has the multiple layers of real wood in the core. It's just the outer 2 plies are of the fiberboard. And so what this does is, A, I don't have as much of that fine dust, but B, I've got great gluing and screwing capabilities with that having a real veneered plywood core to it. So it's a good alternative, and believe it or not, it's lighter than MDF. I think MDF, like a 4x8 sheet, can be up to 100 pounds. It's just crazy heavy. So this is much lighter in weight. So there you go. Should you own it? MDF? Absolutely not, in my opinion. But if need be, you can use the MDO, medium density overlay. Okay. So, question of the week. I started thinking, because I was looking at all your guys' projects on Monday that you send in, and I started thinking to myself, well, what's your favorite wood that you like to work with? So my favorite wood was maple. For years and years and years, I loved maple because the grain on it can be mild to interesting. It's not wild or loud like oak. I like the fact that if I just want it natural, has a very white hue to it, or I can stain it and make it any color I want. I've always enjoyed maple, and it's a hard, dense, good wood. But recently, in the last year or so, I'm really leaning more towards cherry wood. Now, I know some people like walnut. They're crazy about walnut. Some are all about the oak, the white oak or red oak or whatever. But I was just curious if there was any particular wood out there that surprised you as you worked with it, maybe as far as color or working capabilities of it, or how it took stain. If there was a unique wood, because there was a couple of woods that I never heard of before from some of the viewers, especially over there in Australia. They got the different. I can't even remember it now. Trees, the different trees over there. I'd never heard of them, never had access to it. So I was just curious if there's a particular wood that you really enjoy using. Go ahead and type that in the comments, or send me an email. Let me know about it. And as far as emails go, if you watched Monday's episode, I have changed my email address. And the reason for that is this show seems to be getting a lot of new viewers coming in, and they're very eager to share their work with me, and I'm very eager to see it. But this past week, in the flooding of emails, I lost some important emails to some clients that I should have probably responded a little faster to. And so I just thought it was a photo that one of the viewers was sending in. It was actually a job opportunity there for me. So no problem. There's no the customer wasn't upset, but I just started thinking I should probably keep my business emails just that, and then for the viewers a separate one. So this email is pretty simple: woodchoppintime@gmail.com. Please, no G in chopping, right? WoodChoppinTime at gmail.com. And as always, send me your questions, send me your photos, and I'll do whatever I can to help you all become better woodworkers. So you probably noticed this past Friday I didn't have a video. We had finished up that Dovetail Series 1. I don't have my jobs done yet, so I don't have a project video to show you. And I posed the question last week, would you like to see a Morrison Tenon series of not only hand tools but power tools, different variations, and how to do it? And I will do that. Yes, I will do that. A lot of people want to see it. And let me tell you, it's going to be a very in-depth series for it. But before I can start filming it, I have to put all my notes, all my tips, all my little requirements down and get it organized so it's a nice, flowing, understanding presentation to you all. I don't want to be jumping all over the place. So that's going to take me a little bit of time right there. So what I'm thinking about doing for this Friday, and I've been wanting to do it for a while, a little carving video. Now, I don't call myself a carver by any means. There's some fabulous people out there that are carvers, but I like to do carving. And this is one that I've done quite often. I've done them for demonstrations and shows. It's a rosette, and it's a nice, fun, simple project you can do. So I'm thinking about doing this. If it's not up by Friday, it'll be out real soon. Okay, so look for this rosette video. Will be the next one, and I'm also going to give you the history of the rosette, and it's not what you thought it was. So stay tuned for that. Okay, as always, I thank you, the viewer, for watching the show. It's always a thrill for me to talk and converse with you all, and the fact that you tune in each week to see what's going on over here. So until next time, keep on dancing.